Marcus stood his ground as Perry's hand hovered near his sidearm. The tension in the barn was thick enough to choke on. Behind Marcus, Kira pressed herself against the wall of the shelter, too frightened to make a sound. Everything depended on what happened in the next few minutes. Perry demanded again that Marcus step aside. His voice shook slightly, betraying the conflict beneath his rigid exterior. He was young and angry, and certain that he was doing the right thing. Marcus recognized that certainty. He had felt it himself once long ago, before the war taught him how complicated right and wrong could be. Marcus began to speak. He kept his voice calm and steady, the way he used to brief his soldiers before dangerous missions. He told Perry about finding Kira in the barn during the storm. He told him about her parents and their dream of peace. He told him about the Vornithy society that had cast her out for being different. He told him everything. Perry listened with growing impatience. He said that none of this changed anything. The Vornithy were enemies. They had killed thousands of humans during the war. His own father had died fighting them, shot down during a patrol mission when Perry was only 12 years old. He had joined the military specifically to fight the monsters who took his father. He would not show mercy to one of them now. Marcus nodded slowly. He said that he understood loss. He told Perry about his daughter Emma, killed in a Vornithy raid at age 9. He told him about the years of hatred that followed, the dangerous missions, the desperate wish for death that never came. He told him about the emptiness that filled his chest when the war ended, and there was nothing left to fight. Perry's face showed confusion. He asked why Marcus would protect a Vornithy child after losing his own daughter to their kind. Marcus looked back at Kira. She was watching him with those 4 alien eyes, trusting him completely, even though she could not understand most of what was being said. She had no one else in the universe. Her own people had abandoned her. Humans were supposed to be her enemies, and yet she had placed her entire life in his hands. He turned back to Perry. He said that he had spent 30 years learning how to kill Vornithy. He had become very good at it. He had thought it was the most important skill he could possess. But it took one small girl 3 weeks to teach him something far more valuable. She taught him how to see her people as people, not as monsters or enemies or targets, just people who loved their families and feared death and wanted peace. The same as humans. Marcus stepped closer to Perry. He said that he was not asking the lieutenant to forget his father or forgive the Vornithy for their crimes. He was asking him to look at the child behind him and really see her. Not a symbol or representative of her species. Just a scared little girl who had lost everything and had nowhere else to go. Perry's hand trembled near his weapon. His eyes moved past Marcus to Kira, and for a moment, something shifted in his expression. The rigid certainty wavered. He was seeing her, perhaps for the first time. Not an enemy combatant. Not a threat to colonial security. Just a child. Clara appeared in the barn doorway. She had seen Perry's team arrive and come running from her store. She pushed past the security officers waiting outside and walked straight to Marcus's side. Her voice was firm as she announced that she stood with her neighbor. If harboring this child was a crime, then she was guilty too. One of the security officers behind her lowered her weapon. She was a young woman named Rachel Mendez, and her grandmother had been a refugee from a different conflict generations ago. She said that her family had been called enemies once too. Someone had chosen to help them when it mattered. She would not be part of arresting a child. Another officer followed her lead. Then another. One by one, Perry's team lowered their weapons and stepped back. They were soldiers trained to follow orders, but they were also humans with hearts and consciences. The order to arrest a helpless child crossed a line they could not ignore. Perry stood alone, his restraints still clutched in his white-knuckled grip. He looked at his team, at Clara, at Marcus. He looked at Kira. The anger in his eyes fought against something deeper. something he had buried beneath years of hatred and grief. His father had been a good man. Perry remembered him as kind and gentle, always ready with a joke or a word of encouragement. He had not taught his son to hate. The war had done that after he died. Perry had built his entire identity around that hatred, never questioning whether his father would have approved. He thought about what his father would do if he were standing here right now. The answer came to him with painful clarity. His father would never have pointed a weapon at a child. His father would have been ashamed to see his son considering it. The restraints fell from Perry's hands. They clattered against the barn floor with a sound that seemed to echo far longer than it should. He looked at Kira one more time, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he could not quite control. He said that he would not be a monster. Not today. Not for her. 6 months later, the story of Marcus Cole and Kira had spread across human space. The colonial government had initially tried to press charges, but public opinion turned sharply against them. People who had lost family members in the war came forward to support Marcus's decision. Veterans spoke about the difference between fighting soldiers and harming children. A movement began, small at first, but growing every day. Kira became the first Vornathy citizen of a human colony. The adoption was legal and official, recognized by both human authorities and the Vornathy distant movement that her parents had belonged to. Other Vornathy who shared her parents' dreams began to reach out, hoping to build the bridges that Marcus and Kira had started. Perry transferred to a diplomatic position, working on human Vornathy reconciliation efforts. He told a journalist that a little girl had changed his understanding of what strength really meant. He was still learning, but he was trying. Marcus sat on his porch with Kira as the sun set over the Corinth Plains. The sky turned orange and purple, colors that reminded her of home. She asked him to sing the lullaby again. He smiled and began the familiar words. A reporter had asked him once to explain why he did it, why he risked everything for an alien child. His answer had been simple. He said that he did not save Kira. She saved him. She gave him something he thought he had lost forever. She gave him a reason to stop being a soldier and start being a father again. Kira joined in on the chorus, her alien voice blending with his human one. The song drifted across the farm and into the growing darkness. Two former enemies sang together under an alien sky, and somewhere in the universe, the first fragile threads of peace grew a little bit stronger. Marcus looked at his daughter and smiled. Whatever came next, they would face it together. That was enough. That was everything. The days that followed were the closest thing to happiness that Marcus had experienced in 15 years. He taught Kira human words and customs, watching her quick mind absorb everything with amazing speed. She learned to use utensils and operate simple devices. She learned to recognize different types of food and express her preferences. She even learned a few human jokes, though her attempts to retell them always came out slightly wrong in ways that made Marcus laugh. In return, Kira taught him about her people. She showed him Vornathy hand gestures and explained their meanings. She taught him words in her native language, laughing at his terrible pronunciation. She told him stories about her homeworld, a planet called Vornus Prime with purple skies and oceans that glowed at night. Her voice always grew sad when she spoke of home, but Marcus understood that she needed to talk about it. Memories were all she had left. Clara visited often, bringing supplies and news from town. She became something like an aunt to Kira, always arriving with treats and small gifts. The three of them would sit together in the evenings, talking and sharing meals like a strange little family. Marcus caught himself smiling during these moments, a genuine smile that felt foreign on his face after so many years of emptiness. But danger never stayed away for long. Lieutenant Perry had stationed a surveillance drone near the property after the initial search. The small device hovered at the edge of legal distance, watching the farm constantly. Perry was suspicious, and suspicious men did not give up easily. Marcus adapted their routine to account for the watching eye. Kira stayed inside during daylight hours, never approaching windows that faced the drone's position. She played quiet games and read children's books that Clara brought from the colony library. She was patient beyond her years, accepting the restrictions without complaint. She understood that survival required sacrifice. The nights were different. After darkness fell, the drone's visual sensors became less effective. Marcus would take Kira outside to look at the stars. He taught her the human names for constellations, and she taught him the Vornathi names for the same patterns. Different cultures, looking at the same sky and seeing different stories. It felt meaningful somehow, though Marcus could not explain exactly why. One night, Kira woke screaming from a nightmare. The sound was loud and sharp, a cry of pure terror in her native language. Marcus rushed to her room and held her as she sobbed, her small body shaking against his chest. She had dreamed of the crash, she said. She had dreamed of her mother's final words and the light, leaving her eyes. Marcus rocked her gently and began to sing. It was an old lullaby, one he had sung to Emma when she was small. The words came back to him from somewhere deep, a melody he thought he had forgotten. His voice was rough and unpracticed, but Kira grew still as she listened. The strange human sounds seemed to comfort her. When the song ended, Kira looked up at him with her 4 eyes full of wonder. She asked him to teach her the words. Marcus felt tears on his cheeks as he realized what was happening. He was singing Emma's song to another child, a child who was not his daughter, a child who belonged to the species that had killed his daughter. And somehow, impossibly, it felt right. He taught her the lullaby word by word. Her pronunciation was awkward, her accent strange, but she learned it with fierce determination. They sang it together, human and Vornathi voices blending in the darkness. Marcus let himself cry openly for the first time since Emma died. Kira placed her small hand on his cheek. It was a Vornathi gesture of comfort, she explained. Her people did it when someone they loved was hurting. Marcus covered her hand with his own and thanked her. In that moment, the walls between their species meant nothing. They were just 2 broken souls helping each other heal. The peace shattered 3 days later. Kira had been exploring a small bag of belongings salvaged from her family's crash. Most items were damaged beyond recognition, but she found one device that still worked. It was a communication beacon designed to send emergency signals to nearby ships. She did not mean to activate it. Her curious fingers pressed the wrong sequence, and the device emitted a brief pulse before she could stop it. The pulse lasted only 2 seconds. But 2 seconds was enough. Lieutenant Perry arrived the next morning with a full security team. His face was hard with righteous anger as he showed Marcus the sensor data. A Vornathi distress signal had been detected from this location. The exact coordinates pointed to this farm. There was no more room for doubt or benefit of suspicion. Perry demanded a complete search with advanced equipment. His team carried scanners that could detect biological signatures through walls and floors. They would find the shelter. They would find Kira. There was nothing Marcus could do to stop them, unless he stopped hiding. Marcus made his choice as Perry's team approached the barn. He stepped forward and called out to the lieutenant. He said that Perry was right. There was something on this property that he needed to see. But Perry would have to come alone. Perry hesitated. His training warned him against separating from his team. But his hatred for the Vornathi burned stronger than his caution. He ordered his people to wait and followed Marcus into the barn. Marcus led him to the hidden shelter and opened the panel. Kira stood revealed below, clutching the old blanket Marcus had given her on that first night. Her 4 eyes were wide with terror as she looked up at the human officer who had come to take her away. Perry reached for his Vaj, restraints immediately. His voice was cold, as he declared her an enemy combatant and announced she was under arrest. His hand closed around the metal cuffs, ready to bind the wrists of a child who had committed no crime except being born to the wrong species. Marcus stepped between them. His body blocked Perry's path, and his eyes held the weight of 30 years of warfare. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not need one. His presence alone was enough to stop the younger man in his tracks. He told Perry that this was not going to happen. Not today. Not ever. Perry demanded he stand aside. This was a matter of colonial security. Harboring an enemy was treason. Marcus did not move. He was done running. He was done hiding. Whatever came next, he would face it standing in front of this child he had grown to love. The confrontation was just beginning. Marcus worked through the night with tools he had not touched in years. The barn floor was old wood laid over packed earth, and beneath one section was a natural hollow that previous owners had used for cold storage. He expanded this space carefully, reinforcing the walls with scrap metal and creating a hidden entrance that would look like solid flooring to anyone who did not know exactly where to press. Kira watched him work with curious eyes. She did not fully understand what he was building, but she understood that he was trying to keep her safe. When he finished near dawn, he showed her how to open the hidden panel and climb down into the shelter. It was small and dark, but it was invisible. He brought blankets and water and a small light. He explained that she must stay silent when strangers came. No sounds at all. She nodded solemnly, accepting this new hiding place the way she had accepted so many difficult things in her short life. Marcus felt a wave of sadness at how easily she adapted to fear. The morning came too quickly. Marcus had barely finished cleaning up the evidence of his work when Clara Bennett appeared at his door. She had not knocked, just walked right up to his porch with a basket of fresh bread, and the look on her face that demanded answers. She told him that she was not stupid. She had seen his purchases and noticed his behavior. Something was happening at this farm, and she wanted to know what. She had lost too many people to war and silence. She would not lose another neighbor to secrets. Marcus considered lying. He had become good at lying during his years of military service. But something in Clara's eyes stopped him. She was not asking out of suspicion or hostility. She was asking because she cared, in her own stern way. She was reaching out to a man she barely knew because she recognized the signs of someone carrying a heavy burden alone. He invited her inside and told her everything. Clara listened without interrupting. Her face remained still as he described finding Kira in the barn, learning her story, and building the hidden shelter. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Marcus prepared himself for anger or fear or demands that he turn the girl over to authorities. Instead, Clara asked to see her. They walked to the barn together. Marcus opened the hidden panel and helped Kira climb out. The Vornathy girl looked at Clara with obvious fear. She had learned to trust Marcus over the past days, but this new human was an unknown danger. Clara knelt down slowly, bringing herself to eye level with the child. She studied Kira's blue face and 4 frightened eyes. Then she did something that surprised both Marcus and Kira. She reached into her basket and pulled out a piece of fresh bread, still warm from her oven. She held it out to the girl and smiled. Kira looked at Marcus. He nodded. She took the bread carefully and bit into it. Her eyes widened at the taste, and she made a small sound of pleasure. Clara's smile grew wider. She told Marcus that she would help him. Her son had died fighting Vornathy soldiers, and for years she had hated the entire species. But looking at this child, she could not see an enemy. She could only see a little girl who needed protection. Hate had taken enough from her. She would not let it take her humanity too. They made a plan together. Clara would help provide supplies and create distractions when needed. She would be Marcus's eyes and ears in town, warning him of any threats. Together, They would keep Kira hidden until they could figure out a more permanent solution. The security team arrived that afternoon. There were 6 of them, led by a young lieutenant named Daniel Perry. Marcus knew the type immediately. Perry was perhaps 30 years old, with hard eyes and a rigid posture that spoke of recent military service. He moved like a man who was still fighting a war that had officially ended. Perry explained that they were searching all properties in the area for any sign of Vornithy presence. The debris field from a crashed ship had been located 10 kilometers north. There might be survivors, and any survivors would be considered hostile until proven otherwise. Marcus let them search. He showed them through his house and walked with them to the barn. Perry's team examined everything carefully, scanning for heat signatures and biological traces. They walked directly over the hidden shelter 3 times without noticing anything unusual. The old wood and packed earth blocked their sensors perfectly. Perry studied Marcus with suspicious eyes throughout the search. He asked about military service, and Marcus told him. Perry's expression shifted when he heard about Epsilon Station. He knew the name. Everyone in the military knew about Epsilon Station and the massacre that happened there. Perry asked how Marcus could live so close to where a Vornithy ship had crashed. Did it not bring back memories? Did it not make him angry? Marcus replied that he had spent enough of his life being angry. It was exhausting. He just wanted to be left alone to work his land and live in peace. Perry did not seem satisfied with this answer, but he had no grounds to push further. The search found nothing. He led his team away with a final warning that they would be monitoring the area. Any suspicious activity should be reported immediately. That night, Marcus brought Kira into the house for the first time. The shelter was safe for emergencies, but she could not live underground forever. He set up a small space in his back room where she could sleep in an actual bed. She touched the soft blankets with wonder, as if she had never felt anything so comfortable. He sat with her until she fell asleep. She looked so small in the human-sized bed, so fragile and alone. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest as he watched her breathe. He had told himself that he was just helping a child in need, nothing more. But he was beginning to realize that the truth was more complicated. He was starting to care about her, not as a project or a problem to solve, but as a person. He worried about her health and her happiness. He wanted to see her smile and hear her laugh. He wanted to protect her from every danger in the universe. For the first time in 15 years, Marcus Cole felt like a father again. He was not sure if that was wonderful or terrifying. Perhaps it was both. The storm died some time before sunrise, and the first light of morning crept through the cracks in the barn walls. Marcus had not slept. He had spent the night sitting on his crate, watching the Vornithy girl drift in and out of troubled sleep. She whimpered sometimes, caught in nightmares that made her small body shake. Each sound pulled at something inside him that he had thought was dead. When the girl finally woke, she found fresh water and more food waiting for her. Marcus had placed them closer this time, testing how much she trusted him. She ate quickly, her 4 eyes darting between the food and the human who provided it. She was starving. Whatever had brought her to this place, she had not eaten properly in days. Marcus waited until she finished before he spoke. He kept his voice low and calm, the way he used to speak to frightened civilians during the war. The girl flinched at the sound, but did not run. Progress, he thought. Small progress. He pointed to himself and said his name. Then he pointed to her and raised his eyebrows in question. She stared at him for a long time, processing his meaning. When she finally spoke, her voice was rough and uncertain, and the word she produced was a tangle of sounds that human vocal cords could never reproduce. Marcus tried to repeat it, and failed badly. The girl made a sound that might have been a laugh, and for a moment, the fear left her eyes. He tried again, getting closer but still wrong. She shook her head, and said something else. A shorter version that sounded almost like a human word. Kira. He could work with that. He said the name back to her, and she nodded. It was probably not her real name, just a piece of it that he could pronounce. But it was a start. They had names now. They were no longer just a human and a Vornathi. They were Marcus and Kira. The morning brought other problems. Marcus needed supplies from town, and he could not leave Kira alone for hours. He also could not take her with him. A Vornathi child walking through New Haven would cause panic at best and violence at worst. The war had ended 5 years ago, but the hatred remained fresh in most human hearts. He showed Kira the hidden space behind the feed storage area. It was small but dry and warm enough. He gestured for her to stay there and keep quiet. She seemed to understand, pressing herself into the shadows with practiced ease. This was not the first time she had hidden from danger. The walk into town took 30 minutes. New Haven was a small colony of about 2,000 people, mostly farmers and miners who had come to Corinth looking for a new beginning. The main street held a supply store, a medical clinic, a government office, and a few other essential services. Everyone knew everyone, which made keeping secrets almost impossible. Clara Bennett ran the supply store. She was a widow in her early 50s, with gray-streaked hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her son had died in the final year of the war, killed during a Vornathi ambush on a supply convoy. She and Marcus had never spoken much, but they shared a quiet understanding. They were both people who had lost too much. Clara noticed something different about Marcus immediately. He was buying more food than usual, and some of his choices were strange. High-protein supplements, soft foods, items that a man living alone would not need. Her eyes narrowed as she rang up his purchases. She asked if he was expecting company. Marcus hesitated a moment too long before saying no. Clara did not push further, but he saw the questions forming in her mind. He paid quickly and left, knowing that he had made his first mistake. Clara was smart enough to connect dots that others might miss. The next few days fell into a careful pattern. Marcus brought food and water to Kira twice each day. He checked her wound and found it healing slowly. She was tough for her size, tougher than most human children would be. Vornathi were a hardy species. They had evolved on a harsh world and survived conditions that would kill humans. Kira began to talk more as her fear faded. Her command of human standard language was broken but understandable. She had learned it from her parents, she explained. They had studied human culture and language as part of their work. Marcus asked what kind of work. Kira's 4 eyes grew sad, and she said a word he did not recognize. When he asked her to explain, she struggled to find the right human terms. Peacemakers, she finally said. Her parents had been part of a group that wanted to end the conflict between their species. They believed that Vornathi and humans could live together without killing each other. They had traveled secretly, meeting with human sympathizers and gathering support for a peace movement. Marcus listened in silence. He had heard rumors of Vornathi dissidents during the war, aliens who opposed their own government's aggression. Military intelligence had dismissed them as propaganda or tricks. No one believed that the enemy could want peace while they were actively trying to exterminate humanity. Kira continued her story. Her family had been discovered by Vornathi authorities. They were branded as traitors and marked for execution. Her parents had stolen a small ship and fled, hoping to reach human space and request asylum. But something had gone wrong during the journey. Their ship had been damaged, possibly sabotaged by agents who followed them. They crashed on Corinth 4. Her father died on impact. Her mother survived long enough to pull Kira from the wreckage and carry her away from the crash site. She told Kira to find humans and beg for help. Then she died from her injuries, leaving her daughter alone on an alien world. Marcus felt his throat tighten as he listened. This child had watched both her parents die. She had wandered alone through the wilderness until she found his barn. She had no one left in the entire universe. But that was not the worst part. Kira explained that even if her own people found her, they would not take her back. She had a condition, a defect in her secondary eyes that her society considered a mark of weakness. Children like her were cast out, abandoned, left to die. Her parents had protected her from this fate, but now her parents were gone. Marcus looked at the small alien girl sitting in his barn. She had been rejected by her own kind and hunted by his. She had nowhere to go and no one to help her. She was completely and utterly alone. The communication alert on his personal device buzzed. A message from the Colonial Government Office. All residents were advised that Vornathy debris had been detected in the region. Security teams would conduct property searches, beginning the following morning to ensure no hostile elements had infiltrated the colony. Marcus read the message twice. Then he looked at Kira, who did not understand the words on the screen, but could read the worry on his face. Her small body began to tremble again. He made his decision in that moment. He would not let them take her. He did not fully understand why, and he could not explain it to anyone who asked. But he knew with absolute certainty that he would protect this child or die trying. The authorities would come tomorrow, and they would search his property. They would find nothing. He had work to do. The dust storm had been raging for 6 hours when Marcus Cole heard the sound coming from his barn. He sat alone in his small farmhouse on the edge of New Haven Colony, listening to the wind howl against the walls. The planet Corinth 4 was not kind to settlers, but Marcus had stopped caring about comfort years ago. He was 58 years old, retired from the Marine Corps after 30 years of service, and he had come to this frontier world to be forgotten. The sound came again. It was faint beneath the roar of the storm, but Marcus had spent decades training his ears to catch things others missed. Something was moving in his barn. It could be an animal seeking shelter from the dust, or it could be something else entirely. On a frontier colony near contested space, a man learned to investigate strange noises with a weapon in his hands. Marcus grabbed his old service rifle from the wall mount. The gun was outdated by military standards, but it still worked perfectly. He had carried it through the worst battles of the Helix Wars, and it had never failed him. He pulled on his dust mask and heavy coat, then stepped out into the orange-brown chaos of the storm. The walk to the barn was only 50 meters, but the wind pushed against him like a living thing. Dust particles scratched at his exposed skin and reduced his visibility to almost nothing. He reached the barn door and found it slightly open. Someone or something had forced their way inside. Marcus pushed the door wider and stepped into the relative calm of the barn interior. Dust swirled in the air, but the worst of the storm stayed outside. He raised his rifle and activated the mounted light, sweeping the beam across feed containers and old farming equipment. The barn was mostly empty. He had never been much of a farmer despite owning the land for 5 years. The sound came from the far corner. It was a whimper, soft and frightened. Marcus moved forward slowly, keeping his rifle ready. He had fought the Vornathy for 15 years during the war. He had watched them kill his friends on Epsilon Station. He had learned never to underestimate any threat, no matter how harmless it seemed. He rounded a stack of crates and stopped. His finger froze on the trigger as his brain struggled to process what his eyes were seeing. A fawn child huddled in the corner of his barn. But this was not a human child. Her skin was pale blue, and her face held 4 eyes instead of 2. Thin ridges ran along her hairless scalp, and her fingers had an extra joint that made them longer than human hands. She was Vornathy, the enemy species that had killed millions of humans during the decade-long war. She was also clearly young, perhaps 8 years old by human standards, and she was terrified. The girl wore torn clothing that might once have been fine quality. Dark bruises marked her blue skin, and dried blood crusted around a wound on her arm. She pressed herself against the wall as if trying to disappear into it, and all four of her eyes were wide with fear as she stared at the rifle pointed at her face. Marcus had killed many Vonathi during the war. He had watched them die by his hands and felt nothing but grim satisfaction. They were the enemy. They had taken everything from him. His squad had been wiped out on Epsilon Station when a Vonathi assault team breached their position. He could still see the faces of his fallen brothers and sisters when he closed his eyes at night. But this was not a soldier. This was a child, wounded and alone and scared. The old hatred burned in his chest. Every instinct told him to contact colonial security immediately. The Vonathi were still classified as a hostile species. Harboring one was a serious crime. He should make the call and let the authorities handle this. It was the smart thing to do. It was the safe thing to do. The girl made a sound. It was not a word in any language Marcus understood, but the meaning was clear. She was begging him not to hurt her. The sound cut through decades of hatred and touched something Marcus had buried deep inside himself. He had heard that same sound before in a different voice. In a memory he tried never to visit. His daughter Emma had been 9 years old when the Vonathi raided the civilian transport. She was traveling on with her mother. There were no survivors. Marcus had been deployed on the front lines when it happened, and he had received the news through an official military communication. His wife and daughter were dead. Just like that. 2 sentences that destroyed his world. He had volunteered for every dangerous mission after that. He had wanted to die fighting the monsters who took his family. But death never came for him, no matter how hard he chased it. Instead, he survived battle after battle while better people fell around him. When the war finally ended in an uneasy ceasefire, Marcus found himself still alive and completely empty. Now a Vonathi child cowered before him, and all he could think about was Emma. This girl was alone and hurt and afraid, just as Emma must have been in her final moments. The enemy had shown his daughter no mercy. He could do the same to this child and call it justice. Marcus lowered his rifle. The movement seemed to surprise the girl. Her 4 eyes blinked in confusion as she watched him set the weapon down on a nearby crate. Marcus held up his empty hands, showing her that he meant no harm. He did not know if Vonathi understood human gestures, but it was all he could offer. He took a slow step backward, then another. The girl watched him but did not move. Marcus turned and walked to the small storage area where he kept emergency supplies. He found a container of water and some dried food packets. Not ideal for a Vonathi digestive system, but it was something. He carried the supplies back to the corner and set them on the ground several meters away from the girl. Then he retreated again, giving her space. She stared at the food and water for a long moment before her hunger overcame her fear. She crawled forward and grabbed the water container, drinking desperately. Marcus watched her from across the barn. He should call the authorities. He knew that. Every law and regulation demanded it. But he could not bring himself to pick up his communication device. This child had done nothing to him. She was not responsible for the war or the deaths it caused. She was just a scared little girl with nowhere else to go. The storm continued to rage outside. Marcus sat down on an old crate and waited. He did not know what he was going to do when morning came. He did not know how to explain this decision to himself or anyone else. All he knew was that he could not turn away from a frightened child, even if that child belonged to the species he had spent half his life hating. The girl finished the water and looked at him. For a brief moment, something passed between them. It was not trust, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. A connection between 2 broken souls who had both lost everything. Marcus nodded at her slowly. She did not nod back, but she stopped trembling quite so hard. Outside, the dust storm howled and screamed, but inside the barn, an old soldier and a young alien sat in silence together, waiting for the dawn to reveal what would come next.